Hey everyone, this video will show you how to evade tracking dogs during foot pursuits. Many of you have asked me for details on this topic in the last video about general counter-tracking techniques. The module we are going to see today is taught in research, intelligence units and also in some special forces units of the French Army. After this video, you will know how to constantly assess whether your trail is easy or not to follow by cyanotechnical teams. You will know how to limit your olfactory signature. You will know where the capabilities of the cyanotechnical teams end, and we will see that they have limits. Finally, you will know the two techniques that allow you to cut a trail and disorient the tracking dogs. These techniques are systematically used for intelligence missions in the armies and for us in bivouac. It will be useful to know them, for example, so as to be able to rest without being disturbed by any dog that would have simply followed our trail. So these are techniques that I frequently use for my bivouacs. One last thing, I was thinking of keeping the teaching of these techniques for the wise in the forest this summer, but it turns out that we are going to have a mainly theoretical part today. So I'm broadcasting it here, and the practical part can be worked on in the forest along with other tracking and counter-tracking techniques. So that's already a big module to work on in situ. So, dogs can be trained in several different techniques, and there are two that will interest us today. One is search and two is tracking. So, the dog is capable of doing search or tracking. His master will have him explore a windward area if possible, and thanks to his sense of smell, he will be able to detect the presence of any individual within the perimeter indicated by the master. Spontaneously, without a reference scent, the dog is capable of detecting the odor molecules emanating from an individual, which will spread in the air and remain suspended for a certain time. In this scenario, it would be impossible to escape the sense of smell of a well-trained dog if you have stayed in the area, even with a buried stash, as is done in the armies. Within the 7th BCA, the 13th or the 2nd RH, for example, you will be detected. Buried stashes will cut off the thermal visual signature, but not the olfactory signature, even with remote ventilation systems. According to the tests, the only way to escape would be to be in a hermetic box or with a complete autonomy system where everything is recycled. But it's clear we'll never be able to implement this in the field. To handle this situation in open terrain, you must know how to be mobile and only stay a few minutes at a bivouac, as long as the threat of dogs is likely to be present. To continue walking while resting in a short and fragmented way, we use polyphasic sleep, which I have already presented in another video. Tracking now, it's the ability dogs have to follow a trail, sometimes over long kilometers. So, if you are able to maintain a good walking pace, the canine teams will have no other choice but to use tracking. In this case, the dog is exposed to the scent of an individual. This is the reference scent, and it will follow the trail that matches this scent until it finds the individual. So, this time the odor molecules will often have ended up settling on the ground or at an intermediate level, and that's where the dog will detect them. So the reference scent, which will be that of the pursued individual, it can be taken from traces on the ground, climbing traces in a vehicle, an abandoned object, feces, etc. So the accuracy and quality of the reference scent will be one of the most important elements. If it is poorly identified at the start, the dog could outright follow a wrong trail. It is important to understand that the dog will memorize the characteristics of unique chemicals. For him, this reference smell is a genuine olfactory signature. So be careful, in open terrain we will rather deal with tracking dogs, which are often trained for patrolling and tracking, but with a low or medium predisposition for attack. So the dog, in these cases it will be useful for following a trail. Go find individuals in narrow, inaccessible areas, mark individuals when they are found and save time for the tracking team at the end of the operation. On the contrary, in urban areas, we will rather find patrol lighting dogs that are trained in several disciplines. The muzzled strike, the biting, the search, but this time with a less good predisposition for tracking. These are general data, but normally for a dog to perform in its discipline, we will only specialize it in a maximum of 2 disciplines and rarely 3. Dogs in urban areas will be useful for research. Generally, their biting use will only serve to divert the attention of individuals so that in the end the teams can handle them. Several factors influence human body odor, including you have the person's genetics, which will make them have body secretions that will evaporate, pass through the clothes to a varying degree, making it more or less detectable. Then, the more stressed, out of breath the person is, the more they will sweat and the easier it will be for the dog. So it should also be known that it is our breathing that is the main factor in the diffusion of these odorous molecules, but that all chemicals will strengthen them. The smells of laundry on clothes, perfumes, mosquito sprays, tobacco consumption, alcohol, drugs, and even the smells of food or fire will also strengthen this olfactory signature. 2 additional points to note. Now, we do not use odor neutralizers that are developed for hunting, which, depending on their nature, can be counterproductive, especially in counter-tracking. We are very careful not to urinate on hard and flat surfaces, which will generate microsplashes that will deposit on your clothes and shoes. So these are 2 factors that will significantly increase your olfactory signature. Normally, feces should be buried as deep as possible, but they will still generally be detected. During the night and at dawn, smells do not evaporate as quickly as during the day. The trail will remain usable for the dog longer before the traces disappear, so it will increase the practical intervention time of the tracking team. We will have the same phenomenon in cool and cloudy weather, when there is no wind, when there is no sweeping, no smells, no propagation. This is still favorable for a stricter tracking of the trail. In the same way, to cache him, like here, or a dense vegetation area, these are smell traps. So the olfactory signature will stagnate, it will further favor the dog in its search. The speed of the person's movement will also be an asset for the dog. Generally, because in nature we move a lot of earth, we crush a lot of plants in the rush. So there is an important concept, it's that of ecological emanations. You should know that by following your trail, the dog will detect the ecological emanations that your own stride will create. This will let him strengthen the scent signature. When you move on a rich soil, like here in the forest, a complex ecosystem, you are going to crush many plants, you are going to spread pollens, you are going to crush insects, walk in decay, etc. In any case, you should never leave anything in your path, because any object that is left on the trail will allow the team to confirm the olfactory signature, especially if the reference smell is quite weak to begin with and it was taken, for example, from simple footprints. Originally, dogs are trained to find any object 25 centimeters underground, and depending on their specialty, they can be much more. Even buried, the clues confirming your passage will generally be detected. The soils on which dogs will have the most difficulty will be the hilly strips, sand, asphalt, concrete, but also all hard surfaces. Hot and dry weather will allow for a rapid evaporation of odor molecules. This will significantly shorten the practical intervention time for canine teams. Heavy rains will also wash away all particles and eliminate all detectable odors on the track. Winds will also allow for the dispersion and rapid evaporation of odor elements. An important point if you are making a swim crossing, or better a drift swim, or if you are walking on a sufficiently large body of water. In an open area, tracking will be impossible because once they fall, the odor molecules will disperse and circulate in the water. On the other hand, if you walk in a small stream, in a confined area for example, the odorous emanations will settle on the banks. And the trail will be very easy to follow for a tracker. When he finds himself in environments very polluted with smells, strong smells, chemical smells, for example. And even when there is an abundance of microparticles, like in the city, dogs will be disoriented. So it will interfere with their search, and we will also see how we can take advantage of this principle. So not all dogs are as gifted as others. Not all breeds have the same predispositions. They don't all have the same training, the same practice, or even the same bond with their owner. But we can give as an indication some expected performances from a well-trained dog for tracking. Some dogs have an effective tracking sense of smell that can exceed 8 hours. So it remains exceptional. It's often much less. But the canine teams manage the working hours by rotating the dogs, so you always have several dogs on the same mission anyway, because it's a job that is still very energy consuming for the dogs. So the most important parameter is the time elapsed between your passage and the passage of the dog tracking you. The more recent your passage is, the easier the trail will be to exploit. So we're talking about hot trails up to an hour after your passage. So it's an average. But during this time frame, the odor particles will still be likely to be detected in the air. After an hour, we talk about cold tracks. The odor molecules will have settled. And on good ground, a trail can be followed within a maximum delay of 48 hours. If we are on a hard ground, on a road for example, or in the street 48 hours, it will be totally impossible. To give an example, under given conditions. If a dog is able to follow a trail 6 hours old on wasteland, it will not track more than an hour on the road. It will take under 10 minutes, whether in the city or village streets. What you need to remember is that in all cases, the older the trail is, the more time it will take to be worked on. You also have to consider that after 24 hours, a trail always requires a lot of time and is always worked on very slowly. So all these elements already give us a good idea of the scope of intervention and the limits of the canine teams. So an important concept to know is that of hotspots. Hotspots are areas where your scent is amplified. Either because you rested there, you stopped there due to an injury, you may have lost blood there, you urinated, you may also have left something there. The dog's reaction will be to search in this area because generally it will associate strong smell with recent smell. So he will need to understand that he is on a hot spot and determine the new trail to follow. For a canine team, the discovery of a hot spot is generally a waste of time. But it also allows the master to know that he is indeed following the right trail. So it's a double-edged sword, as it's also often an interesting confirmation for the canine team. So now we're going to talk about techniques that involve masking your olfactory signature with a strong smell or using products without disturbing the dog's sense of smell. So it turns out that by spreading pepper, chili, tear gas or any other substance on your shoes, on your clothes or even behind you on the trail, you're going to introduce and you're going to imbue yourself with a completely unusual smell in the landscape. And the dog is going to systematically associate this new, very noticeable smell with your olfactory signature. So it's still here that he's able to follow an evolving reference smell in his landscape, even assuming that his sense of smell is disturbed. In a few minutes, he will have an easier time following your trail, which will be reinforced by this diffusion of substances. Don't forget that you are in front of and in the presence of persistent dogs trained in discernment. If on your way you find carrion or feces in isolation, do not try to impregnate yourself with them, or walk in it thinking that it will mask your smell. It's exactly the same principle. Under those conditions, it will enhance your olfactory signature and you will be even more noticeable. Now, to create a track break and escape the tracking dog, we can use two techniques. So these are two techniques that can be combined with each other and are based on areas that we will create. These are areas that we will call disorientation zones. To establish these zones, the sole requirement is that we need a slight lead over the canine team. Firstly, we will be able to use the opportunity to mask the smell. The smell masking works very well, but for that we will need to reach a particular area. It's a place that will be polluted by strong disruptive smells. This place needs to be at least 100 to 200 square meters in size. So, for example, we can use a meadow that is heavily laden with dung or droppings on which the dog will be disturbed, because there will be a significant amount of strong smells and masking. So it's this environment saturated with destabilizing smells that makes the difference, a bit like when the dog is disoriented in the city. The technique on these places will be to go to the area most loaded with parasitic smells, then to trample on the excrement of cattle or other products, for instance. So it can also work in sheepfolds, pigeon houses, large chicken coops, all sorts of areas, but the best places are agricultural sheds. So if you come across large mechanical equipment, public works, forestry, even trucks, you can climb on the machinery. Impregnate your feet with diesel, mechanical grease, tar or the like. When you are well impregnated, you can clear the area as discreetly as possible, leaving the least amount of traces possible, of course, and if possible on a hard surface. One can use a stick impregnated with diesel or oil, for example, in order to clear the vegetation to still leave the least amount of traces possible. So, with this technique, if a team passes behind you on a hot track, you have some chances of being pursued. Of course, but after a delay of 1 hour, for example, you have 99% chance of having cut the track between you and the team. Technique. Second technique. Now it's the technique that will play on the hotspots, loops, crossings, backtracks, etc. So we saw that the dog tended to associate strong smells with recent smells. That's how he chooses his tracks. So this time in a natural environment without olfactory disturbances. We're going to identify a vegetated area about the size of a handball court, close to an escape point, with a hard surface, if possible. That's still an important element. For instance, a field next to a road. In the chosen area, we will create tracks with a strong olfactory signature at first by dragging our feet, touching as much vegetation as possible with our hands, etc. Then we will retrace our steps, we will make several loops, and little by little we will reduce this olfactory signature. We can also create 1 or 2 hot spots at the beginning of the track. Finally, and always being very careful to minimize traces, we will head towards the hard surface, the track, the path, the road. And this will allow us to hide and evade. So you should know that these two techniques are even more effective if you have several dogs and dog handlers who are present simultaneously in the area, because they will tend to confuse the trail with their own repeated passage. So there are indeed ways to do it. You must not make a mistake. You have to experiment it well on the field. But when it's done well, most of the time you get a good trail cut. There you go, we've covered the techniques and you now have the best understanding possible about tracking and trail cuts. So of course in this field, nothing is ever certain, because dogs sometimes have behavior that's hard to understand. But you should know that these are techniques that yield very good results in training. Don't hesitate to subscribe if you want more content, because there's still a lot to learn in the field of survival. Share, make good use of it, and I'll see you soon for the next video.